she says, well, Richard tried to sit on me to keep me from hitting him. And I was trying to get him to confess to murdering those veterans at the VA hospital, and he wouldn't do it.
Oh boy.
And next day they go back, and apparently they've made peace. And that's just buried in this little police report. You'd kind of hope that the police officer would have been like, well, Melissa, why do you think that your husband is, has done these things, or why are you trying to make him confess? But it's kind of like, that's not my jurisdiction.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. Well, all right, you ready to talk about the VA?
Yeah, thank you for having me back to talk about this.
Of course. I mean, obviously, there's the intrinsic tie because your father was directly involved in this. 92 when this was happening, 4 years before I joined. So I was 14. I don't remember ever hearing about this. And what's funny? I read some of the source articles that they attached in prep for the show. Not a lot of details. It's super vague. This is the person that we think did it. There's no mention of how. There's no mention of circumstances. We didn't have enough evidence. And then, of course, I went on this internet sleuthing mission trying to find this dude now. Where is he and what is he up to? Very hard.
Very hard.
Yeah. Found an article from the LA Times from like 2010 saying he was released from jail, but I couldn't find an article saying that he was sent into jail. So, I mean, honestly, I think the best intro into this is maybe you just taking whatever time you want to just unpack the situation, because there's not a lot.
There's not a lot out there. Things disappear from the internet, and you're thinking like, events of 1992 might as well be, ancient Roman history in terms of the internet. I mean, everything disappears. But fortunately, and let me give you the Greek. Fortunately, I had 16 boxes of documents and government reports and FBI transcripts to go through to put this podcast together. And, as my father was the pathologist who started this investigation. So we'll bring everybody in. It's 1992. We're at the Harry S. Truman VA Hospital in Columbia, Missouri, which is a nice college town. And the VA hospital there is probably one of the best in the state of Missouri. And there are a lot of patients dying, which isn't so unusual because it's a hospital. But they're all dying on Ward 4 East. And they're dying usually in the middle of the night. And they all appear to have the same nurse. So summer of 1992, my father, who is a pathologist and a medical examiner, is in his office, and I remember his office very well because he still has the same office. He still is at the VA hospital.
Wow.
And the chief of staff, Earl Dick, that is a real name, Dr. Earl Dick, comes in and says, hey, Eddie, about to take my vacation. Some of the nurses are saying that there's a lot of deaths on this one ward, and they think something's going on. Did you have a look at it? They're saying maybe it's this one nurse. And my father is a pathologist. He's like, well, it's a VA hospital. The patients here are mostly World War II veterans, so people who, were smoking their whole lives because the government used to give cigarettes to the soldiers as rations. So a lot of them are in poor health. And, this is a hospital, so people die. That's what happens. So he listens to the nurses, and he has the chief of research, Dr. Gordon Christensen, who's an epidemiologist, studies disease. And he says, hey, Gordon, I want you to go over this data and get back to me because people are concerned. So he does a kind of blind study of this, of the wards, of all the wards, the nurses attending. Each nurse is given a code number, so he doesn't have any bias, so he doesn't have a name. And after doing this analysis, he realizes there's an unbelievable chance that all these people are dying in the same ward with the same nurse around the same time. And that nurse is Nurse H. And so,
and not to interrupt you, this is just all based on mathematics at this point, right?
This is all based on mathematics at this point.
Working backwards.
Working backwards. Later, there's a lot of other things that come up that add substantiation to this, but there are rumors, and math. And he's looking at the math, and the statistician comes back and he says, yeah, all these center around Nurse H. There is no way that these deaths are occurring without Nurse H being involved in some way, whether he is incompetent or whether he or she is incompetent or whether or not, there's some external force involved, but this is unnatural. And the Linda McGarry, who's in charge of quality improvement, QI, she's like, you saying it's Nurse H? And she goes, wow, like, because this is what everyone is rumoring about. Everyone is saying it's Nurse H. And it turns out Nurse H is, has said things to other nurses, in the ward, like, hey, I took 3 out last night. How many did you get? As if it's a competition. Wow. To, and not only that, you're getting into kind of hospital minutia here, but a code blue is what is called in a hospital. And if you've been into enough hospitals, you'll hear it sometimes over the speakers. Yep. When someone has, died or stopped breathing and they're trying to resuscitate them. And in this one ward, in this hospital, which is quite large, not only have the number of deaths spiked around this one nurse, but so have the number of code blues. But basically, when this nurse is on call, there's a code blue called. And that's something that isn't supposed to happen often, maybe once a week, not 3 times a week. As a matter of fact, there were so many code blues called on this guy that his nickname in the pharmacy department was Mr. Blue, because when he was on duty, you would get a code blue. Gordon comes to my father and he says, Eddie, my dad's name is Edward Adelstein, but everybody calls him Eddie. He said, Eddie, we got a nurse murdering patients here and we got to do something. We got to call in the FBI. And my father's like, wait. Let's not use the word murder. I mean, maybe he's just taking care of the sickest patients and, or maybe he's just, the winner in the bad luck lottery. But after doing the analysis, he's like, yeah, this is whatever is happening, wherever this nurse goes, people are dying, and they're dying at an unprecedented pace. And we got to get him off of patient care. Immediately takes him off of patient care. Chief of staff comes back. They go to Joseph Kurzieski, the director of the hospital, and said, we got to take this nurse off of staffing, can't have him have contacts with the patients, and we need to call in the FBI. And then Kurzieski talks to someone at the top of the VA. I think it was a guy named Falcone, who is above him in the food chain. And on the phone call, which was my father's in the room, the VA administrator says, Joe, the last time we had to call in the FBI, we had to fire the director and the chief of staff. Is this what you really want to do? And that's when the cover-up starts, because the VA is dead set on not investigating this, not getting to the bottom of this. And even until the news finally breaks, the director of the hospital wanted to return this nurse to patient care. And that is the beginning of a nightmare. I mean, a very Kafkaesque tale, because everybody who tried to keep this nurse away from patients, everybody who wanted to call in the FBI, everybody who told the truth got punished by the VA hospital, and everyone who participated in what was clearly a cover-up and an attempt to block the FBI's investigation, they were all rewarded.
That sounds insane, but that tracks with the documentation, the limited documentation I was able to find online. Were they able to remove him from direct patient care at that time, at least?
You know, they tried to remove him from patient care and they put him on the ICU.
Which
And
is
for a
not
short,
the removal of patient.
yeah, I know. It was so there was this limbo period of time where they assigned him a chaperone. And when the chaperone didn't show up for work one day, 2 more patients died.
And that's kind of why I was asking. I'm wondering, I definitely want to get deeply into how the cover up started. And I'd love to kind of track this person because I know they left the VA hospital and then went to a nursing home where deaths started occurring at a statistically increased rate. But if they,
About 5 times what you'd expect.
yeah. So if they're able to give him a chaperone or remove him from patient care, what happened to that death rate in Wing 4E?
Oh, as soon as they took him off of the ward, the death rate plummeted. You went to like 1 death a week. An absolutely statistical correlation. When he was on duty, people died. When he wasn't on duty, people didn't die. You could just chart it on a chart of like deaths at the VA hospital, times when Richard Williams was working, and you'd see them line up almost perfectly.
The one thing I wasn't able to find, other than there was one mention of a codeine injection that could have led to a heart failure. How do they surmise that he was killing these people?
Well, one of the problems with this thing was no one is ever able to figure out, to determine the method that I have to say that he allegedly used to kill these patients, if he was killing patients. It turns out that there is a surprisingly large number of ways to kill people in a hospital without being detected. I had a very nice conversation with Dr. Bodden, who was actually a witness for the VA in a lawsuit against them by the families of one of the veterans who died, of the Havam family. And, he said, oh yeah, there's I'm like on the phone. He said, I believe in the transcripts, you said there are 4 ways you could kill a patient without being caught. He's like, oh yeah, insulin, adrenaline, air bubble, succinylcholine, all of these ways. You could kill them and it would almost be impossible to detect. So I don't think they know what he did. What was interesting is that the FBI took a hell of a long time to do the blood work on this, which was a really problem. And why is that such a problem? Because what do you think the FBI investigated this case as, right? You've got 40 veterans dead at a hospital. Maybe 50 have been killed. So what is the charge that the FBI investigates? What is the case classified as?
I mean, for clarity, I got my Juris Doctorate by watching Law and Order, so people should remember that. I would guess that this would be investigated as murders or attempted murders.
No, it was investigated as a civil rights case.
Interesting.
Which has
how did they classify it as that? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Have you ever seen Mississippi Burning?
I have. Movie about talking a few decades ago.
Okay, it's a long time ago. It's about the murder of some civil rights workers by the Klan in the 60s. And the actual case is a civil rights violation because if you kill someone, you deprive them of their life, liberty, and the right to happiness.
Okay.
Basic, plain, ordinary homicide isn't the FBI's jurisdiction. Now, the VA was an interesting case because it is a federal institution. That's occurring at this federal institution. It makes sense for the FBI to do this because this is a huge case. They have the resources, they have the will, the power, but they don't have the mandate. Normally, a homicide case, that's the local police. As a matter of fact, because I grew up in Columbia, Missouri. The FBI called chief of detectives at the Columbia Police Department, and the guy at the time was Carol Heibarger. His name is Carol, but he is a guy. He is also my sister's father-in-law. The FBI called up Carol and said, "Hey, Carol, we got a bunch of people dying mysteriously at the VA hospital. Do you want jurisdiction here?" And Carol was like, "Hell no! Like, you're the FBI. This is a federal institution. There's a lot of people dying. We do not want this case. You take it. We're not taking this. We don't have the manpower. We're just a small town police department." So the FBI came into this case, but a civil rights case has a statute of limitations for 5 years, or did at that time, which means after 5 years of sort of, pardon my French, of can I say fucking around? Well, you can bleep me out.
100%. Yes,
Okay.
You absolutely can.
Thank
I
you.
support it and recommend it, actually.
Thank you. I used to work in community radio in Columbia, Missouri. We could never say that word. So after 5 years of fucking around, they sort of like, oh, we sent off the blood work, but it's too late, and case closed because statute of limitations has run out. But one of the cases where they actually sent the lab work in was this case of LZ Havam, who was this, wonderfully nice guy, all-American bricklayer, loving good dad, sometimes auctioneer, I think. And the toxicology came back and he had a lethal amount of codeine in his blood. Codeine that couldn't be explained by anything he was being given at the hospital. And, the family was smart enough to sue the VA hospital for wrongful death within this very limited amount of time that you have to do when someone dies because of a federal government's misconduct or lack of safety precautions. It's like 1 year. And it's about 1 year. You have 1 year. Now you can argue that you didn't know that there was malfeasance or a lack of care on the side of the government, and that you should be given an extended time because all the information wasn't available to you, but basically you have a year from the time they die. So the Havam family had this great lawyer named John Kurtz, who kind of took the case pro bono. Kurtz is a wonderful guy. Kind of reminds me of like Atticus Finch, except if Atticus Finch looked like the tall man in Phantasm, like he's really tall and really lanky, and has an American flag necktie, and operates out of a brick building in downtown Kansas City that has a giant American eagle on the side. But he is also just like this wonderfully liberal. I guess at one time he was studying to be a Methodist minister. Wonderful guy. He took this case on for the family, and so they had this toxicology that suggested that the nurse had killed LZ Havam using codeine, which would definitely kill someone if you have any kind of pulmonary problems or breathing problems. And in a very surprise, I'm giving away sort of the podcast stuff here, but in a very surprise judgment, Judge Nanette Lowry, who was also kind enough to speak to us about this podcast, went over all the evidence, including the toxicology, including the fact that the death notes, the notes that are put on a patient's report, sort of a patient's file when they pass away at the hospital, including the notes had been altered strangely by the nurse, concluded in her verdict, very bluntly, she said, the preponderance of the evidence is that Richard Williams killed LZ Havam, and the VA hospital knew that there was a problem with him and failed to prevent it, therefore making them liable for wrongful death. And she awarded the family $450 million. And, in her verdict and in her writing, she does not mince words. She writes, Richard Williams killed LZ Havam. And she certainly implies that he probably killed other people.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode is brought to you by Firecracker Farms. A question for you, perhaps it's too personal. Do you like things hot? I'm talking about your food. I'm actually talking about seasoning, in this case, specifically salt. Specifically, Firecracker Farm hot salt. I never thought salt could be, I guess the word would be dynamic. So Firecracker Farms, they're made with Ghost, Scorpion, and Carolina Reaper peppers. The flavor is ridiculously delicious, and everything you put it on gets better. It isn't too hot. If you're familiar with peppers, those 3 that I listed, they're spicy, but this is a choose your own adventure. The first time that I tried this salt, I put it on a ribeye steak, my personal favorite. I didn't really know what to expect because I've salted steaks many times before, but holy cow, this is the only thing I have put on any steak that I have made since that day. Firecracker Farm is a very small family brand. It's just the founder, Alex, and his family going all in on a great product and supporting great causes, like Operation 300 and the Pipe Hitter Foundation, with a percentage of every sale. Alex has been legitimately bugging me to be a sponsor of Change Agents for a while now. And here's what I can wholeheartedly say. His product is, in fact, awesome. It's not as good as you might think it is, it's better. So go get some while you can at firecracker.farm. Use code IRONCLAD to get 15% off your first order at firecracker.farm. So I've watched some documentaries in the past. God, I would like to say that this is not a common thing. And I'm actually, common is not a correct word for this, but it has happened before where people in the nursing profession have been killing those under their care. And it seems like one of the ways that this particular individual got caught on one of the documentaries I watched was because they were using controlled substances. And I think this was post 1992 because it seemed as if the systems were a little bit more complicated. They were barcoding in and out every drawer that they would open it. And it ended up again, this is a little bit of time in the past since I've seen this. They were figuring out a way to manipulate that system and either moving vials around or pulling something out and then not using it, even though putting it on the records. And that's how they were able to get the narcotics that they were using to kill people. Was the VA not tracking the narcotics?
No, in 1992, there was no tracking at all.
Okay.
One of the substances they thought he might have used to kill people was called succinylcholine, which is probably the most difficult to pronounce murder weapon in my forensic knowledge. Kevin Crane, the prosecutor who actually indicted Williams before having to drop the case, he has a problem with saying it. He said they just called it succinylcholine. The byproduct of succinylcholine, which can sometimes be used to prove that it was used on someone, is succinylmonocholine, which is even a longer word. And I'm so proud of myself for being able to say these words. It's took me a long time. But interestingly enough, and one of the reasons I got back into looking at this story is about 2017. I was on a bus back from St. Louis, Missouri to Columbia, Missouri. And if you live in Columbia, there's only like one bus that really takes you from St. Louis to Columbia directly, which is the Mo Express or Mo X. And the driver recognized my name because there's not that many Adelsteins, right? And he struck up a conversation with me. And he's like, "Oh yeah, your dad was a hero. He was the guy that started that investigation at the VA. And I was in the pharmacy department at the time. And I remember that I was asked by the VA to sit on a panel, which was designed to get your father kicked out of the hospital because he had borrowed a drug to euthanize a dog and hadn't returned it promptly." And I was like, what? You like the VA tried to fire my father for borrowing a drug to euthanize a dog? And he was like, yep, it happened. You should ask your dad about it. They were even called in the Drug Enforcement Agency because it's a controlled substance. They really wanted to get rid of your father, but I refused to sign off on it, and so I got fired. And I was like, oh, I was thinking I better tip this guy. But as we were talking to him, he was like, yeah, I was in the pharmacy department, and one of the things the FBI asked us about was succinylcholine, and at the time, it was all over the place. It was something that was used before surgery. It sort of stops the heart, stops people from breathing. And if you put it in there enough, it kills someone, and it leaves the system very fast. He's like, I was always convinced that was what he used to kill people. And if you don't, it's in and out of the system so fast that if somebody dies from it, unless you have proof that it was done right there, you probably would never be able to detect it. And so he was a pharmacist, and he was telling me how poorly controlled substances were at the hospital. Now, buried in these, FBI transcripts, because the FBI came in and did do an investigation. There's this one nurse. I think we call her Nurse Candy or something in the podcast, because she didn't want to talk to us, and I respect her not wanting to talk to us.
Mhm.
There was this one nurse who was convinced that Nurse H, or Richard Williams, was killing patients, and so she began following him around and taking blood sugar samples from patients he had just visited, because she thought he was killing them with insulin.
Mm.
And there was one guy who died about 30 minutes after she took the samples. So she was quite concerned that he was killing patients, and she believed that it was insulin, but she could never prove it. And ironically, Williams said, this nurse dislikes me and is setting me up and making me look like I'm killing the patients when it's actually her. And there was one other nurse on board who has passed away, Victor Kohler, I think, who agreed. He's like, yeah, I think it's possible. She's a bad nurse. She hates Richard Williams. They don't get along. I totally believe that she could be killing patients and pinning it on him just to get rid of him from the hospital. And so there was an investigation into that possible theory.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get into elite shape, or perhaps just make improvements to your current level of fitness, check out the Mountain Tough digital training program. You can try it for free for 14 days, and you can see the results for yourself. The app allows users to train wherever they are with minimal equipment requirements, whether you're in the gym or you're outdoors or you're at home. Users can access top-tier programming that fits into their lifestyle. The Mountain Tough app offers expertly designed progressive training plans that guide users from start to finish. These plans are tailored to build resilience, strength, and endurance over time, preventing burnout and injury. The app features self-guided and follow-along coaching videos, allowing users to be coached through every workout step by step. This helps to ensure proper form, motivation, and intensity, regardless of the user's fitness level. The Mountain Tough app delivers training programs built for the unique physical demands of mountain athletes, including hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers. The programs themselves are designed by seasoned strength and conditioning experts, elite athletes, and military veterans. Start your 14-day free trial today and check out the results for yourself. And be sure to use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS, and I'm looking at it as one word, at signup, and you can get 40% off your annual subscription. Remember, use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS at checkout. When these people would code, did Richard Williams, was he one of the people who would respond and try to save their life?
Oh yeah, he would, when there was a code blue, Richard Williams would be the first person there. When these people are dying, he would be the first and the last person there. He would write their death notes. He was always there.
It's a fascinating exploration into somebody's psyche. Did he enjoy killing people? Did he enjoy this moment of rushing in and trying to save somebody, even though that they were obviously going to die, but he wanted to appear as being a hero? What a fucked up brain.
Yeah. If he was guilty, right? If he was guilty, the BSU, the Behavioral Sciences Unit of the Bureau, did a profile of what they thought the killer would be. And their analysis, there would be someone who felt very powerless in their lives, and very powerless in their lives, and very certain of their ability to do their job well, and to decide who was in so much pain that they shouldn't live. And a lot of these people who died, I'd say the majority of them were not critically ill patients. They weren't in horrible pain. They weren't going to die. A lot of them were getting ready to go home.
Well, we're all going to die. They just weren't going to.
We're all going to die. Yes. What is
spoiler alert, everyone?
Here's a joke that my father loves because he's a coroner. Why was the Buddhist coroner fired?
I have no idea.
Because he kept putting down the cause of death as birth.
Which, from an existential perspective, is very true. I get it.
It's very true. But there was a very well written profile of what they thought the nurse who was doing this would be like, and someone who's on the scene, someone who needs to show that they're in control, someone who feels emasculated in their life and powerless. And this is how they assert power. And this particular nurse was, he was very pale, prematurely balding, very effeminate, which people made fun of him for. Had a very overbearing wife. According to documents from the FBI, he had issues with maybe latent homosexuality. He got busted for using a company phone to make calls to one of those 1-900 hotlines.
Only you and I remember those. Now it's just OnlyFans and like Insta porn.
Okay. For the younger readers, in the days when there wasn't the internet, you could pay money by the minute to call up to someone and have sort of phone sex, kind of like sexting, but within real-time audio.
Yeah. I bet you there were some massive phone bills back in the day.
And Richard made some calls using a company hotline to a homosexual content sex line, and that became that became an issue. Actually, one of the most bizarre things as you're reading through, as I'm reading through thousands of pages of depositions and FBI interviews with suspects and witnesses, and there's Special Agent Phil Williams. Now, Phil Williams is no relation to Richard Williams, but it does get a little confusing when you have, Special Agent Phil Williams investigating Richard Williams.
The Williamses.
I think we just call him Special Agent Phil in the podcast to make it easier to understand. So buried in this deposition, Phil was like, yeah, I was in Jeff City, and I ran into Richard Williams' wife, Melissa, at a diner. We were having a conversation, and I said, hey, Melissa, I don't think your husband is telling you everything. I'm like, and she's like, what do you mean he's not telling me everything? Like, well, I sort of, about those phone calls he's making to the 1-900 lines, the ones, for, and she immediately got it. And she was like, he told me he would stop doing that. I can't believe he's doing that. And she went home. They had a hell of an argument, I guess. And, Richard Williams calls up Phil Williams, and he's like, what did you tell my wife? And he's like, I might have let it slip that you were improperly using the phone lines, Richard. And he's like, well, now I'm in the doghouse. I got no place to go. And he's like, why don't you come in, Richard? And we'll have a talk about it. And, and he's thinking like, okay, I've got this guy rattled. He's going to come in, maybe we'll have a productive conversation. But he shows up with his wife. And, basically the gist of the conversation is, as told by Phil Williams, is that she's like, well, he may be a homosexual, but it doesn't make him a murderer. And then he refuses to take a polygraph. So that didn't go over very well. Yeah. But there are some bizarre incidences in this case, including this report from the Ashland police, where Williams was living, written in very sort of police talk, in which the Ashland police show up at his home, domestic disturbance. Richard comes to the door. He's got like a cut under his eye. They ask him what's happening. He says, we quarreled, no problem, just go home. And the cop says, no, actually, we decide whether there's been a problem here, something actionable. And when they interview Melissa and ask him, why were you guys fighting? She says, well, Richard tried to sit on me to keep me from hitting him. And I was trying to get him to confess to murdering those veterans at the VA hospital, and he wouldn't do it.
Oh boy.
And next day they go back, apparently they've made peace. And that's just buried in this little police report. You'd kind of hope that the police officer would have been like, well, Melissa, why do you think that your husband is, has done these things, or why are you trying to make him confess? But it's kind of like, that's not my jurisdiction.
Yeah, and they were there for a domestic violence call. I don't know how much they'd be interested in that. But it seems like And again, I'm not an investigator. Law enforcement is, or even the investigatory world is not really my purview or experience, but it certainly seems like there was an immense amount of evidence pointing at this person. How did the VA successfully sweep this under a rug that must have at this point Mount Everest underneath it?
Well, I am so glad you asked. Da-da. I got this long list of all the veterans that associated with Williams who passed away. It's like 50 people. Okay, so this is from the Government Office of Government Accountability Office, which actually used to be the General Accounting Office. I don't think most people know that bit of trivia. So they did an investigation of the VA's investigation into the
into the government deaths. Investigating the government. That's great.
Yeah, well, what they determined was the VA investigated themselves, and they put out a report that basically said there is no merit to allegations of a cover-up of the deaths there. And the Government Accountability Office did a investigation. The investigation said, actually, the VA hospital never spoke to anyone who would know whether there was a cover-up or investigated any of those allegations or talked to the people there. So they can't have said that there was no cover-up because they never investigated whether there was one or not. But in the report, they did notice that the hospital director, Kurzieski, was in charge of dealing with this thing, didn't notify law enforcement and authorities of the unexplained deaths. He didn't notify the authorities of the statistical relationship between a nurse and the unexplained deaths, despite telling the staff physician who had developed the analysis that he would do so. When he learned that a staff physician had accused the nurse in question of killing his patients, did not refer to the matter to the Office of Inspector General. He demoted the chief of police. The hospital had their own chief of police because the chief tried to obtain information about the hospital's response to the unexplained deaths. There was a peer review board that was investigating the doctor who confronted Williams about killing the patients as a HR violation. And when this board realized that maybe there was actually some truth to the allegation that the doctor was accusing Williams of killing patients, he blocked any attempts for them to get the statistical analysis that would have shown there were things to be worried about. He told everyone at the hospital that they could not talk to the FBI. And he told the staff physician, Gordon Christensen, who prepared the statistical analysis, that he could have no further contact with the FBI. And he warned people that talking to the press or talking to the FBI could be a violation of federal law for which they could go to jail. So intimidation, fear, and systematic burying of evidence or refusal to share it with people sets up the stages of cover-up.
And to this point, only that one family has successfully been able to do anything about what happened to the veteran.
Yes, only the Havam family has had any sort of relief, because at least in federal court, and they didn't care about the money.
Yeah.
I mean, what they really wanted was someone to acknowledge that their father had been killed and that the VA could have prevented it and that they did not. And in a federal case, Judge Nut Lowry, 1998, ruled for the family, explicitly stated the cause of their father dying was that he'd been killed by a nurse at the VA hospital. It could have been prevented. And even though the VA appealed it, which is, you can see here, they lost that one too.
Is there any way at this point to hold the VA or the people that seem to have participated in this level of cover-up accountable, or is it all past?
I think everybody who was around at that time has left the VA or passed away. There's not a lot of people who were left at the time. It would be nice to have it reinvestigated. It would be nice if the VA said, okay, you know what? We did make a cover-up. We apologized to Dr. Adelstein. We apologize to Dr. Christensen. We apologize to Earl Dick posthumously, even though they're no longer on this earth. We're really sorry. You did the right thing, and we wish we had paid attention to you. I mean, the irony of this whole thing is there's an investigation. For whatever reasons, the FBI doesn't pursue it. Statute of limitations ends. FBI closes the case. Civil case comes up. Basically a civil court judge, kind of like an O.J. Simpson thing, says like, yep, guilty, in the sense that you can be, the preponderance of the evidence is that murder occurred. Then the investigation is kind of reopened by the prosecutor. And there is this point in time where Richard Williams is arrested and indicted on 10 counts of murder.
Oh, that's the article I saw in LA.
Yeah.
So I
So
didn't subscribe to the LA Times, and I wasn't going to pay the $1.99 to read the article. So I figured I'd ask you.
well, let me save you $1.99. So so the prosecutor has good intentions. Kevin Crane is, he's now a judge in Boone County. He's no longer the prosecutor. But he is told by the National Labs, which is affiliated with the FBI, that they have this new evidence, this new testing material that they have used on the tissue samples from the bodies that were exhumed in 1993.
Yeah, they exhumed
and
15 is what I read.
10, I think, 13 bodies.
Okay.
13 bodies. And that of these, there are 10 with succinyl monocholine have been found in the tissue, which is a byproduct of succinylcholine, which shows that they were all murdered with succinylcholine. And considering the statistical evidence and who did the death charts and all the circumstances, it's got to be Richard Williams. And he is arrested and charged on 10 counts of murder. And Kevin Crane is seeking the death penalty. And all that seems to be going swimmingly well. Williams is not given bail. So he is basically held in custody for a year. And then one day on a telephone call with, people involved in the case, Kevin Crane's on the phone, and one of the tech guys goes like, I took that new test that the FBI is saying is determined, has determined what the murder weapon was. And I tried it on a steak I bought at the supermarket. And you'll never guess what I found.
Oh boy.
Succinyl monocholine in a steak. And Kevin realizes, wow, my whole case has gone to shit. If this scientific method won't stand up in court, I don't think I can win this case beyond the shadow of a doubt. And it turns out that Dr. Ballard, who had devised this new testing method, had given testimony about it in a trial in Florida where a doctor was accused of killing his wife with succinylcholine. And in an appeal, it was thrown out. And a new trial was ordered because they were like, this doesn't meet the scientific method. It can't be replicated. The results are dubious. And suddenly, with all the evidence that he has, and being told that this won't stand up in court, he decides to drop the charges, and Williams goes free.
What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Gold prices have surged, reaching nearly $2,500, a 20% increase in under a year. With traditional investments under scrutiny, gold and other precious metals have become attractive alternatives. The rise in gold prices reflects growing skepticism towards conventional investments and highlights its stability. Notably, even banks are increasing their gold reserves, underlying its lasting value. Gold isn't just a short-term play, it's a long-term strategy for financial security and growth. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting, gold should be a part of your investment portfolio. Start securing your financial future with Allegiance Gold, a trusted leader in precious metals With top ratings from TrustLink and an A+ accreditation from the Better Business Bureau, Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or delivers precious metals securely to your doorstep. If that sounds interesting to you and you go to protectwithandy.com today, listeners will get an exclusive lowest price on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com, or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative.
Officials are warning of a widespread cybersecurity attack. Frustrations and delays have continued as countless are still without power. Market volatility is at its highest since the pandemic. There are a number of reports across the state. An unidentified crashing news. There is no doubt our grid is at risk. The market is entering cyberspace.
Talk me through Richard Williams' professional trajectory after the VA hospital. He obviously was aware that people were investigating him. What led him to being, because he arrested in LA? Is that why I saw that in the LA Times?
No. I just think it was a big national news story because it had been reported.
Talk me what
he
was up
started
prior to him being arrested, because I'm fascinated to know where this guy's life took him.
Well, he started as a hospital at like St. John's Hospital
Prior
early
to
in
the
his
VA?
career, prior to the VA. And he was fired for falsifying records. He was fired allegedly for falsifying records and not giving patients the medication that he said he gave them, which should have been a red flag.
Yeah.
But the VA hired him anyway. And after this whole scandal and his name is in the paper, he leaves the VA, and the VA gives him not only a clean bill of health, a recommendation letter, and he gets a job as a nurse in Ashland, Missouri, where in the 10 months he's there, I think 10 months a year that he's there, about 30 patients die, which compared to a similar period of time when he's not there, in which 5 patients die, or 6 patients die. Yeah, 6 patients die. So basically, when he's there, the number of deaths is 6 times.
Yeah, I'm not.
The number of deaths is 5 times what it normally would be.
I'm not great at math, but I think if you chart this out, a 4th grader with crayons could see a connection here.
Yeah, I'm not great at math either. Yeah, so 6 people at the time that 6 people die in a period of time that he's not there. Let's say 1 year period, and the 1 year period that is there, 30 people die. So you can see that seems to be a statistical anomaly that is concerning. And he is fired from there after what is considered as quality control issues. Then he takes various jobs, not in nursing. He does the books for a Panera bread shop. That's where he was working when. That's where he was working when he was arrested. After he gets out of jail, he does a number of accounting jobs. He really sort of disappears. The last job I know that he had is he was working at a funeral home in St. Louis, Missouri, around 2020 during the pandemic. And I called the funeral home, and I sort of pretexted them because people don't really like to talk to journalists sometimes.
Yeah.
And respecting rules about what you can say about former employees, they did indicate that he had issues with the other employees, which is why they let him go.
The nursing home when he was at for 10 months, what did the death rate the month 10 months after he had left, or the year after he had left, what did the death rate return to? Was it normal, or did it stay elevated?
I don't think there was I don't think anyone's looked at the period of time after he was there. I think they looked at the period of time before he was there.
Yeah.
But after he left, this is anecdotal because I think anyone took the numbers. Death rates were what you would expect at a thing, maybe, not several months.
A return to normal, if you will.
A return to normal. Now, one of the things that was interesting about the Ashland case is my father is also has been, he is the medical examiner, but he's also been the deputy medical examiner. So when he found out that Williams had gone and worked in Ashland at a nursing home and then left, as the deputy medical examiner, he went down there and he made them give him the records. And that's why we know that when he was working there, compared to a period of time when he wasn't working there, there were 5 times as many deaths.
In your estimation, how many deaths do you think he is overall responsible for that you can find the documentation associated with?
All right, I'm going to be very legally wormy here. If Richard Williams, allegedly, if Richard Williams is actually responsible for the deaths that he is associated with, I would put the number at somewhere around 72. That would be the 40 plus veterans at the VA hospital whose death he was associated with, the 30 people who died at Ashland. And in a note from the VA hospital, someone reported that at a hospital, at a nursing home in Columbia, Missouri, where he worked one weekend in December of 1992, 2 people died.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many people Ted Bundy killed? And I bring that name up because that is a notorious serial killer that a lot of people would resonate with, and I feel like the number is drastically less than the 7.
I think Ted Bundy is in the 2-digit numbers, but so is this guy. I would say that if he is responsible for all the deaths he's associated with, he would be the most prolific killer in American history.
I'm Googling it right now. How many people did Ted Bundy kill? He confessed to killing 30. That was 2x, probably the allegedly.
If he is responsible, then
unbelievable, because almost everybody knows of the Bundy case, and he was targeting young women, very vicious. But this is an individual operating to some degree in the shadows and in the protection of a government agency, potentially, allegedly, hypothetically. I am not claiming that he did, could have killed 2x the number of victims of Ted Bundy.
It is horrific. And as my father said in testimony for Congress, that it is also amazingly horrific that the VA hospital worked so hard to try and cover it up because they didn't want this stain on their record. So the doctors who blew the whistle on this, who are all punished, demoted, harassed, bullied, treated like pariah at the VA hospital, even though most of them didn't quit. But they were required to make a report to the director or to the hospital anytime they were contacted about this case. So there's an interesting note from Dr. Gordon Christensen, who got the worst of it because he was the one did statistical analysis, and he was the one that insisted on blowing the whistle, including to VA staff members who came to the hospital and didn't want to talk to him because they didn't want to hear that a nurse was killing patients. Ms. Robbins, who is the father of Otis, who is the Mrs. Robbins, who is the daughter of Otis Leslie, who was a veteran who died at the hospital. She came and asked Dr. Christensen at the hospital, was my father killed? And what do you say to someone in a case like that? And what he says is, I don't know for sure. In aggregate, it is clear too many people died on Ward 4 East that summer. In my personal opinion, not as a representative of the VA, the deaths took place under circumstances which I do not believe indicate a natural or accidental death. Therefore, I believe some of the deaths were intentional. It is my understanding, however, that the FBI has been unable to determine how the patients died. Therefore, it is impossible to state which patients died as a result of their illness and which patients, if any, were killed. If it is any comfort to her, it is possible that her father died naturally. And she asked him, did he suffer? And what he says is, to the best of my knowledge, and assuming some of the patients were killed, none of the patients who died had any awareness that they were being attacked, and none of them suffered. If they had a sense of what was happening, I believe they simply thought that their time had come.
That is an incredibly threading the legal needle statement.
Yes, but it is also incredibly courageous for him to basically say, yeah,
he went as far as he could without putting a toe over the legal line.
Yeah.
Do you think the VA has cleaned up their act when it comes to things like this? Because I know in a recent article you wrote, you referenced a 2014 scandal in Phoenix where there was a secret waiting list allegedly that potentially caused numerous deaths. I'm just wondering, I mean, this originally we're talking about 92. That article references 2014. I mean, decades in between those, actually 30 years in between. No, 20 years. Again, I'm not great at math. Are they capable of cleaning up their act? Is there a mechanism in place that provides transparency?
The VA hospital, to their credit, learned from this, and they instituted a nationwide network of gathering the data from all the VA hospitals and analyzing it for cases like this. So if there's a spike in deaths around one nurse or one ward, they're probably going to find it. And, you know, the VA offers great medical care. It is the only socialized medicine we have in the United States. Really, there's nothing. I guess the Indian Reservation Services have a kind of socialized medical care, but there's nothing like it. So if you're a veteran, it is the most affordable medical care you can get in the United States, and it's pretty good. They do a really good job. Let's give them credit for that. And they've certainly learned from this case. But one thing that I don't think has been learned is that if you're a whistleblower in the VA system, if you insist on telling the truth, if you see something wrong and you put yourself on a limb to do the right thing, you're probably going to be punished for it. And that's not a great system to have.
That's the opposite of what the whistleblower system was designed to be.
And, you know, and you can say that maybe that's across all the systems we have in the US government. You know, you're the guy that doesn't, you know, the guy that doesn't go along with, you know, the team, the guy that makes people lose face. You're the bad guy. Doesn't matter if you're saving patients' lives or you're preventing a terrible tragedy. You're the troublemaker. And, you know, look what happened with Boeing. There was a guy who blew the whistle on poor practices there, who basically said you're going to have, you know, doors falling off of airplanes. And what happened to him? Not good things. He also died very mysteriously after all that became well known. But
yeah, choosing to shoot yourself in the back of the head is an interesting way to commit suicide.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there any way, or is it the opportunities have passed where Richard Williams could still be held accountable for any of this?
Well, you know, this is the interesting thing, and this is where I mean, you know, the former prosecutor Kevin Crane said, you know, one of the reasons he dropped this case is because, and every prosecutor knows this, you only get one shot.
Yeah.
If you try someone for murder,
double jeopardy,
and they're found innocent, that's the end of the story. So while he has been indicted and arrested and charges dropped, he has never gone to trial. So if there was someone who wanted to take this case on circumstantial evidence, or even take the Havam case and try him for one count, base it on a overdose of codeine, they could do it. But the question is, who would? I mean, that's a gutsy move.
Yeah. Well, it depends on how much you care about the truth and righting wrongs.
I mean, I know that the families who are still alive, you know, keep waiting for some kind of closure on this that they're probably never going to see. Dr. Gordon Christensen, the guy who blew the whistle on this, the one who went head to head with the VA, before he died, he recorded a series of interviews with his daughter about this case, hoping that maybe there would be some sort of resolution to it. And when we were speaking to his wife and his kids, they gave us the tapes. And I know Gordon. I edited his science fiction novel before he passed away. And it's kind of weird to hear this voice from the grave. I mean, did he know that there would be a podcast? Did he know that someone would pick this up? I mean, part of me hopes that, somewhere out there in the ethosphere, whatever your metaphysical beliefs are, that he is listening to this and happy that something has been done.
I mean, there's got to be a reason why he took the time on that particular subject matter. Whether it was to, try to have a lighter heart or a clearer conscience, or in the hopes that somebody would do something with it. That's not an accidental act. That's an intentional act to leave that behind.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that it existed, and I was glad to have it. I'm surprised that people listen to, I'm not surprised that people listen to this podcast. I'm surprised that it has resonated with so many people. But I would hope the part that resonates with them isn't just the crime. It's that that there's something wrong with a world in which people who do the right thing get punished, right? You should be rewarded. They should be heroes, not pariahs.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good exit point. Tell me about the podcast that you did about it and where people can find it.
Witness Night Shift. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcast. If you would like to listen to all the episodes at once, you can pay Sony on the binge. Otherwise, there's one every week coming out. So on Spotify, Apple, Audible, wherever you listen to your podcast, you can pick it up and listen to it. Night Shift is not the greatest title, but it is the one commonality between most of these deaths.
I mean, it's not the worst title. I could probably in the next 5 minutes give you some really shitty ones that you definitely should not use.
Yeah. And also the podcast has some dark humor. It's hard to find any humor in this, but we took the time to really get to talk to the families and the lawyer and the prosecutor and the people involved. And you get a nice sense of mid-Missouri stoicism in there as well.
Any final closing thoughts you want to leave people with before we end our time today?
Somebody has to stand up and do the right thing. You're not always rewarded, but my takeaway from all this is that the people who did do their part, who tried to set things right, even though they may have suffered career-wise, I think spiritually, they were rewarded. You'd hope that works that way.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. I'll see you all next week with an all-new episode.
Order now. The two women who were killed and found dismembered in Juarez on Sunday were from El Paso.
On the southern border, there is a legal concept known as reasonable fear, a lifeline for those fleeing violence.
A Texas couple was found tortured and murdered.
Police say so far this month, 11 women have been killed in Juarez.
And then their bodies or body parts offered up to Santa Muerte as an offering. She represents death.
In this special Borderland docuseries, I take a deep dive onto true crime stories. Join me as we uncover the truth about the fear behind the crisis.
This was a group of powerful people.
Never been seen before in Mexico.
Evidence of ritualistic elements.
We ended up rescuing almost 200 kids.
The discovery of multiple women in mass graves.
They're almost in every state. When you put it together, you have an economic extortion map.
But even more violent.